Ralph Waldo Emerson, philosopher, poet, radical. Ralph Waldo Emerson was born May 25, 1803, in Boston, Massachusetts. Emerson was a pioneer for Transcendentalism in the mid-19th century, a concept largely expressed in his essay Nature in 1836. In fact, Emerson wrote dozens of essays, the most important of which were originally formulated as lectures and revised for print. A few of his most well-known essays included The Oversoul, Circles, The Poet, Experience, and arguably Emerson's most well-known, Self-Reliance. Nature, published in 1836, formally established the foundations for Transcendentalism. The essay maintains that mankind is unappreciative of beauty within nature. Also, he claims that society desecrates the wholeness of man, which can only be found in union with nature, and we must isolate ourselves from the machinations and flaws imposed upon us by society. Following Emerson's impactful essay on nature, he produced a speech in 1837 titled The American Scholar. This work cemented his visionary idea that called for America to form its own unique cultural identity, especially in its literature. The American Scholar also wielded transcendentalist and romantic views to further his ideal of a scholar's rightful relationship with nature. Self-Reliance is notably Emerson's most significant work, particularly in that it thoroughly expresses his philosophical ideals, promotes avoiding conformity and false consistency, a recurrent theme throughout his works. Self-reliance promotes Emerson's thought that individuals should follow their instincts and ideas, rather than conforming to suit society's standards. One of his most famous quotations can also be found in this. Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statements and philosophers and divines. Emerson also noted that to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Also, he said, to be great is to be misunderstood, in comparing himself to other social rejects throughout history, such as Socrates, Jesus, and Luther. Ralph Waldo Emerson published most of his famous literature during the National Expansion and Reform era, yet also lived through the Civil War and Reconstruction era, dying at the age of 78 in 1882. Emerson said concerning the Reform era, in the history of the world, the doctrine of reform had never seen such a scope as this present hour. The era of reform impacted Emerson in that he participated in social reform by spearheading the Transcendentalist movement. Emerson was also anti-slavery, though he shied away from the limelight and preferred to be more reserved than his abolitionist friends. The Civil War and issue of slavery prompted Emerson to write The Conduct of Life. Emerson's essay reflected that era by his attempts at literarily tackling controversy on abolition. Major historical events that could be associated with the author's work include the American Civil War and its subsequent Reconstruction era. Emerson's legendary Transcendentalist work brings insight into the human psyche as understood by the 1800 society. His essays, commonly associated with mysticism and individualism, are a worthwhile read and would provoke one towards introspection. Emerson's writing drastically altered society. His work on transcendentalism and self-reliance can be found in Modern Ideas on Independence. The ideals found within self-reliance shaped the American identity in that its core teachings evolved into the contemporary ideas of a self-made man. His legacy forever molded the philosophies of individuality and freedom. Also, his near-pantheistic views on the relationship between the human soul and nature rejected the notion of God, something radical for his time, and also led to a growth in atheism in America. Emerson was invited to speak at Harvard, where he publicly denounced God, discredited the existence of miracles, and called into question the divinity of Jesus Christ. He was not invited to return to Harvard to speak for at least another 30 years after that ordeal, commonly referred to as his Divinity School address.